Lord, we thank you very much for bringing us here today in your loving embrace. Everyone is going through their own story, their own journey. I pray that this talk is here to plant seeds in their heart, to clarify things that they may be confused with, or even just inspire them in their vocations. Only you know our hearts, Lord, and we are known fully to you only. We ask this in the session of St. Charbel and all the saints, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Alright, so before we start, I actually want to congratulate you all, not thank you, but congratulate you for coming tonight. This not actually happened out of your curiosity on the group chat. And it's such a good reflection that a parish that grows together will stay together. Because unfortunately, and we see this a lot happening in churches, if you just keep people at church, they will leave. And you can reflect on your own experiences. If you just come to church, do the same thing, and then you do your own routines, you generally feel like come the time when you just want to stop. Either you're not being challenged or you're not finding deeper fulfillment. So talks like these, nights like these are done for that reason. Alright, so keep your curiosity and don't let the questions stop tonight. Let them continue. So my job tonight is not to teach or educate. That's not our job. Alright, everyone here is going through their own thing. My job is to plant seeds and ask you questions or inspire questions so that maybe later on in your life you can answer them or look for the answer. We will be giving questions and answers tonight, so just keep that in mind as a rule for life when you're in the faith. Alrighty, so before I get into the slides, I don't know why Nathan added this slide.
These are very old, I didn't update them. You can
This is your family in G or something?
I don't know.
Maybe, I don't know.
You can just click to the next one.
Fair enough. I don't usually dress up in suits. I was just at work, and I do have a degree in theology and philosophy, so I'm not some random guy that's just come out of the street. Then again, the degrees don't matter much these days, I suppose, but there's a lot of study and research that goes into what this is, and topics like these. Marriage especially, it's actually the youngest sacrament of all the sacraments. What I mean by that is, marriage, the way we understand it, was never spoken of or heard of until how long? Who can guess? We often think of the sacraments as like full on from the start, from Christ's time. But marriage as we know it today, who knows how long it's been that way? Anyone want to guess?
Adam and Eve.
Wrong. The way we know it as a sacrament. It's actually only No, it's actually the way we see marriage, the way we know it today, started with the Council of Trent in the 15th century. It's the baby sacrament, the way we know of it today. Not that it wasn't before, but the way you understand it, it's very infant. So most of what we know about marriage has only been written in the last 500 years. So put it that way. Alrighty, so without further ado, let's start. Charlie, look your next slide. So you have to remember is that we want to go back to the origins of marriage. You think that if marriage is very important to our faith, it'd be in scripture, and it is. So it starts with marriage in the Old Testament. We see that the origin of the marriage, I guess, is with the perfect harmony of the marriage is seen in Adam and Eve. So we see that, I'm not sure if you were running through the four originals at the time.
We were.
Okay. Anyone remember what the four originals were? Those who have been here for Nathan's series? No? That's fine. Pretty much, there was a time where Adam was just by himself. That's called original solitude, so he's by himself. Then Eve was created. That's what we call original unity, how they lived in that period of life. Then there was original nakedness. So they were naked, they were in front of each other, naked without shame. They saw each other fully as God intended to see another spouse. What happened when we sinned? God tells them, who told you were naked? So sin clouds the vision or the true beauty of another person. And then obviously we have original sin, where we are essentially after in our lives. Then we have Tobit. For those who've never read the book of Tobit, if you're Protestant, you would not have heard of it. It's not in your Bible. But essentially, long story short, Tobit is a very holy man, and he's marrying a woman, and she's actually has a demon in her. She's actually been married 7 times. And the night of her wedding, the demon would overpower her husband, and they would die. But then comes Tobias, Tobit, a very holy man, and he prays. He's a very holy person. And Saint Raphael, the angel, actually speaks to him a lot. He protects him. And through the grace of God, the marriage is blessed. So we see this sense of marriage only being blessed for the righteous. those who have faith with God. They're the ones that fulfill the full notion of it without any attack from the devil. We get to the book of Hosea. It's pretty much God always wants them to get covenant with his people. Just very quickly, covenant and contract. A contract is exchange of goods, but a covenant is exchange of persons. And we see obviously throughout the whole Bible, especially in Hosea, God is binding himself to his promise, especially to his people in Hosea. So that's why in the Old Testament, Jerusalem is referred to as the bride of God. And rebukes her because she's impure. She's essentially, he calls her a whore because she goes and finds fulfillment away from her husband, which is God. So keep that in mind. I'm only going through this really quickly because our talk is going to expand a lot more than just this. Deuteronomy 24. Deuteronomy 24 is very important for us to remember, mainly because we see marriage mentioned in the negative. What does that mean? Is that if there's a negative of something, it means there's a way it should be. There's a positive to it. So we see what marriage is not meant to be in Deuteronomy, which implies that there's a certain way marriage should be. And we'll get into that later on. And just like we see in the Old Testament, the Old is contained in the New. So next slide. We see marriage in the New Testament. Now, for those of us here who's heard of the famous passage of the wedding of Cana. Okay, fantastic. If I was to ask you what you understand from that, you'll probably be able to tell me some really good reasons, or be pretty good, interesting theological facts from it. But I want to challenge it. I want to take it further in a way you've probably never heard before. Okay? The wedding of Cana, we see Christ is present at a wedding, and he interferes in this wedding. He interferes in a way where the bride and groom don't even know. Okay, because it wasn't the bride and groom that said they have no wine, it was the steward. Then everyone kind of spoke, and then Our Lady heard, and Our Lady told our Lord, they have no wine. So we see Christ interfering in this wedding, and his grace is felt not just by those who saw the miracle, but everyone experiences his grace. There is a seat here if you'd like to come and it's made manifest. Christ isn't just attending the wedding, he's actually partaking in it, and he perfects it. Okay? And it's not just he perfects it, he provides the wine, perfect wine, and he overflows, he gives extra. God's word never is just enough. It exceeds every expectation of our lives. That's why it says it was like 6 jugs full. So for those who love wine, it's a lot of wine, especially at a wedding. So, if I'm going too fast, just let me know, okay? I'm just trying to unpack the scripture a little bit, and we'll get into, we'll dissect what marriage is more about. Now, something to note in the wedding of Cana is we see, through the grace of Christ, water turning to wine. But at Mass, we see wine turning to blood. In theology, we call this typology, where something reveals something greater. So just like you have Adam, so you just like have Eve, you have Mary, the new Eve. There's Moses, there's the new Moses. This typology, where water turns to wine, the wine turns to blood, is a foreshadowing, is another typology of the blood or the drink that we enjoy at the wedding feast of the Lamb. So we see Genesis and Revelation connect, and it's by marriage. So we see marriage the Bible begins with marriage and ends with marriage. And Mass is meant to reflect that. We all partake at the heavenly banquet of God. Obviously in between, most of us know this verse from weddings. We're not going to get too much into that. We'll touch on it a bit later. And we will touch into this topic later on. Did that kind of help anyone see it a little bit differently? Where marriage is intentional, Christ is intending to do something at Cana. He just doesn't supply the need of Our Lady asking. He actually goes above and beyond, and he begins his ministry. Is it ironic that his first miracle was at a wedding? No. Nothing happens. Does anything happen in coincidence in our faith? It's deliberate. And for those who've caught on really quickly, especially in the Western Church, I guess, this is why we allow people on their wedding day to celebrate the Eucharist on their wedding day. Because you'd hope that they're trying to bring and make manifest that connection. We're just like we're about to enjoy a wedding with drink and dance and bubbles. We also want to enjoy it with the body and blood of our Lord. So that's why the church allows the rite of the liturgy of the body at a wedding. It's to make this present. Okay, now obviously the ceremony by itself is still enough, but it's all good if you guys want to do it as well. So, what changed after all this? If Christ gave such a good example of what he wanted marriage to be, what changed? Was marriage not proper or enough in the Old Testament? That's a question. If we see Christ trying to change marriage, or improve it, or raise it to something bigger,
Restore.
what was marriage supposed to show or do in the Old Testament?
Is that because in the New Testament, or when you get married nowadays, it's a covenant with Jesus as well? By the Old Testament, obviously Jesus wasn't around.
Okay, good. Does anyone understand that point? Or has anyone ever heard of that point?
That Jesus is the new covenant.
Not just that, but marriages were something before Christ. And after Christ, they become something again. So clearly Christ did something to the theme of marriage. That's what we're going to unpack tonight. Okay, next slide. So, this is what I want us all to remember. The church defined something called natural marriages and sacramental marriages. Okay? So marriages on the Old Testament are considered what? Natural marriages. And, okay, next, can you press the button? Thank you. Move out of the way. What is required of a marriage is these three things essentially. And you can put any marriage to the test in scripture, or any marriage that we know of in our lives, or if you're thinking of getting married, these three things are what you need to consider. Okay? Full consent. You need to know what you need to be able to say yes fully. You don't have a gun pointed to your head. It's not an arranged marriage. You know what you're partaking in. It's not just a piece of paper for you. Lifelong commitment. This idea of having one person you devote yourself to for the rest of your life, just like Christ devotes himself fully and wholly to his single bride, the church. This notion of I am yours and you are mine. And of course, in marriage, when two people come together, they must be able to be open to what?
Life.
Good. The Lord says, go forth, be fruitful and multiply. So these are what we call the ends or the goods of marriage. Okay? However, go back. Say it again.
Oh wait, the other way?
Yeah.
Forward.
Okay. So, does anybody then know what it takes for it to be a sacramental marriage? Without reading this part, I guess. Did the Old Testament have this?
No.
Wait,
Yes.
yeah.
Did the Old Testament have these three?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the difference between today and then?
You have to be Christian, and obviously you couldn't be Christian if Jesus wasn't around. And, yeah. So you have to be baptized in the name of Christ.
Okay, fair enough. And you came to the word baptized. Because weddings, because marriages weren't exclusive to Christians, right? Not even to the Jews. Pagans had weddings. Right? Other faiths have weddings. Hindus have weddings. Jews have weddings. Muslims have weddings. They all try to, not all, but the notion is there, especially at least for in the Old Testament. But for a sacramental marriage to happen, you need to be. Please remember this for the rest of the talk. Okay? It's being baptized is what elevates it to a sacrament, and we'll go into why. Okay. Just one second. just so I can explain this a bit more so you don't get confused. When we look at the cross, what do we see? What are we supposed to see? One word.
Love.
Sacrifice and love. Amen. Does it look like love?
At first, no.
First, no. The saints refer to the cross as the marriage bed of. Does anyone know why? Has anyone ever heard that before? So, just like we're going to get into it, but just like how we have an exchange of persons on the wedding night, and them coming together makes their vows come to life, our Lord's vows were realized on the cross. That's why the cross is called the marriage bed of Christ. And from the cross, he bled water and blood when he's pierced on his side. And that's what we say the birth of the church happened. Christ bled for his church, he marries it forever. That's why baptism joins to marriage. No longer is marriage temporary on earth, it's eternal, because Christ's love is eternal. That's why it's sacramental. Christ fuses himself to sacraments, to the sacraments. Alright? Next page. Is anyone lost so far? Please, feel free to ask. Okay. Probably be nervous, but we'll unpack a bit more. Next slide. So natural marriage is these three. To enter into sacramental marriage, you need to be baptized. We'll get into that a little bit more. So, what are the essential rites of marriage? Rites just means the prayers or the things needed for it to happen. If we ask ourselves, what is needed to happen in a baptism? What would you say? In a baptism, Raquel.
Priest and water.
Okay. What's the most important part that you need in the baptism?
The Holy Spirit.
The water.
The water.
Okay, so you need water, and you need what?
Christmas. Form.
Is the water by itself? We just pour water on the person? What do we do as well?
Blessing. The
Father,
words.
Son, Holy
The
Spirit.
words. What words, Angela?
I baptize you in the name of the Father.
Okay, so if
Forming.
someone ever, yeah,
Forming.
correct. So in every sacrament, we have what's needed for every sacrament. I understand there's some new faces here, but for every sacrament, there's a minimum requirement. Every sacrament has to have matter and form. Matter just means the material that is being used, and form is the formula. It's what we say, what we formulate with our tongues. So if I was to ask you just now, what is the matter for sacrament? For baptism, what would you say? Water. Everyone should say it confidently. What is the matter for baptism?
Water.
What is the formula for baptism? If I say I baptize you in the name of the Creator, Redeemer, and Sanctifier, are you still baptized?
Invalid. Yes.
It's invalid.
Greater.
Why? Why is it invalid?
Because only the Father and the Holy Spirit can baptize.
Amen. And what was your name, brother? What was your name? Sammy? Samir. What's that?
MVP.
Is MVP. Beautiful. Well said as well, Raquel. So, words are very particular. The church has defined this for a reason. Okay, so in confession, your formula, the form for the sacrament of confession is what? No.
The prayer of absolution.
Correct. It's when the priest says to you, I absolve you in the name of the Father, and Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. If the priest does not say those words, you are not absolved. That's why he can't whisper it. He whispers everything else probably, but he actually has to vocalize that part. Okay? But what is the matter of confession? What is the material needed for confession?
Sin.
Is sin material?
No, it's saying the sins.
Saying the sins is the form. What's the matter?
Sin.
Priest.
It's the sign of the cross.
You know.
Repentance.
No, we'll get into that, but no.
Priest.
It's no.
Ourselves.
It's ourselves.
The penitent.
We are the matter. Because you can't confess via the phone. You need to be present and exchange the words in front of the person. Alright? So the reason why I'm going on this merry-go-round is that, yes.
Did you say the priest? The whole stuff.
For, no, I've said nothing. Only for confession, matter is the person themselves. So you, if you go to confession,
Doesn't have to be the priest as well, because the priest is necessary to without the priest it can't be done.
so there's a second phase to the question. So the matter and form, I'm trying to get that down pat. Alright? So everyone understand matter and form?
Yes.
Now, in every sacrament, this is probably a good summary for Nathan, but every sacrament there is an officiator, someone who exercises the sacrament. So who was the officiator of baptism? Someone said it before. The priest, deacon, or in emergency circumstances? Anyone, correct. In confession, who is the officiator of confession? Or bishop, only them. Can't confess to your mate and expect to be absolved from God. Okay? Now, here's where it comes to the thing. If I was to ask you, go back.
Sorry.
Slow down. One more time, you're fired. Oh, good. If I was to ask you, what is the matter of marriage?
The consummation. One
Man
man
and
and one.
Only.
Okay? I know you can't be answered that, kind of probably went over people's heads. I'll come back to that. What is the form for the sacrament of marriage?
The consent.
Yeah,
So the
the
vows.
vows.
Correct.
I do father.
So,
And the covenant. I do father.
well said. So, here I just got it in a more way. So, material is when we accept, it's the exchanging of persons, one man, one woman. Okay? And obviously, the vows that I said are mutual consent. That's the vows exchange. So, what are the conditions needed? Vows and one man, one woman, preferably never married validly before. Okay? Now, if I was to ask you, who is the officiator of marriage? What would you say?
The couple officiate the sacrament onto one another. Isn't that right?
Has anyone ever heard that before?
Yes.
Yeah, I have. I want to know.
A genuine question to everyone. Has anyone ever heard that the couple are the ones that render the sacrament to each other? It almost sounds like heresy. There's no priest needed, right? Is Tia correct?
That's a marriage
It's like an equal.
She is very correct.
Technically, yes.
Are you with Stella?
Okay, so that's what I'm trying to inspire that question. Chloe.
Isn't it the crowning? When the
Mm.
crowning happens? Because obviously you only get crowned.
Unfortunately not, because the Western Church doesn't do the crowning. So if one church does it, another does it.
Is this a Western talk or an Eastern?
This is marriage.
So things like the crowning, the candle, the rings, none of that is needed for a valid sacramental marriage. All that is needed, we'll get to it, but it's what Tia said, the couple are what makes the marriage valid between them. It's the only sacrament that does not need a priest to render it valid for so long.
Marriage?
Marriage. Because it's the couple that bring Christ between them. What does that mean? At different points of the marriage, one person is going to be more Christly than the other. If I was to ask you if the woman is pregnant, is she not then bearing life? Is she not co-creating with God? Is she not bearing life with God? And in other times of the marriage, if the man is essentially protecting and defending and providing, is he not the provider like God is the provider as well? So the Aquinas then says, Chloe,
Yep, sorry.
the matter that marriage needs is quasi-matter. It's not material, it's a person. It's the only sacrament that doesn't need a material to make it valid. Just like Christ baptized all the water, so we use water because water cleanses spiritually and physically. You have to understand this is what's unique about marriage. Is the first time anyone heard that before? Alrighty. So, usually this is when people ask, was Mary and Joseph married? But we'll get to that a bit later. If you guys want to know, you can ask it. Alright, next slide. So everything we've just said is to come to this point. What should marriage reveal? What should marriage emulate?
The relationship between.
How did you get to that?
Follows Jade on Insta.
I don't know, Instagram.
How did you get to that? Okay. If you're fully exchanging yourself to another person
Yeah.
forever in unconditional love,
You become one body.
correct?
Is that a contract?
And what is that meant to foreshadow? What is it meant to reveal? The nature that exists between them? Trinity. Trinity, you said it. Say it.
Yeah.
Trinity.
The Trinity. So marriage therefore allows the couple to be the sign of God's love for the church because they both will be Christ at different points. I've already said that. So, marriage essentially must be a reflection of the Trinity, because the Trinity is so animate, it's so eternal, it's so loving, and it's so strong. The Father is always the love who loves forever, and the Son is always the beloved who is beloved forever. And that love between them is so strong that is a person itself. From it comes life. That's the issue what the Trinity is. Marriage reflects that. That's why God permits life to be created from a marriage. He's giving us little breadcrumbs on earth. That's the beauty of a marriage. That's why those couples who struggle to fall pregnant, they sometimes, on a spiritual level, forget this. But love isn't about us making a baby. It's that I fully exchange myself to you and vice versa, so that God can be made manifest, and then God blesses it. And from it comes life. Alrighty? How are we going? Is everyone still on the same page? Okay. Nathan, do you want to say anything? Really?
That's a surprise. I'm trying to be humble today.
Alright. So just to summarize this slide, please, if there's anything you remember from this talk, let it be this. You cannot separate the unitive act or the unitive significance from the procreative significance. You cannot separate the unity of marriage from the procreation of marriage. Please remember that. Because as soon as you get rid of one, you have every single attack on marriage that you see today. IVF, homosexuality, contraception, abortion. Every single attack against marriage that's happening today happens when you forget
I didn't do
that. Chloe, you're
I
fired.
did not do it. I did not miss it.
Happens when you forget that. Because when it comes to marriage and the true role of sex, if you can take what I just said, those two sentences, you will never be faulted in any debate on marriage, religious or not. Because if marriage is supposed to be an ultimate good, it doesn't need religion to back it up. It's truth in itself. As soon as you get rid of the unitive aspect of marriage, then you can just make babies commercially. Which was happening, IVF, surrogacy. Why should I need to sleep with my husband, assuming I'm a woman in this example, when I can just rent out my room and have another woman have my baby and deliver it for me? Why do I need to go through stretch marks and labour pain myself? I'll just pay a woman to be a surrogate mother. We've removed the unity from marriage. And then we trip out when we say stem cell babies, trip out when they learn one day that they're not a product of love. All these people who are born through IVF, obviously it's no fault of their own, but there is a big impact psychologically when the person finds out that they were not made as an act of love. And for those who doubt that, when parents divorce, the child essentially thinks the same thing. Do they not love me enough to stay? If again, how then, if through IVF, you can't separate the unitive action from the procreative action. Please remember that, guys.
Do you have a question, Charbel?
Sharps.
You said that you can't take away procreation out of the marriage, right? If you don't have procreation, it doesn't work.
Yes.
Let's just say the woman can't fall pregnant, right?
Great question.
Then what's the
Or the man.
or the man, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Then what's the church's view on adoption? Does that go against it? Because if God's not permitting you to have a baby, what's the view on adoption?
It's the alternative. It's the solution for many people if they are truly open to life and they can accept another's that isn't theirs and loves it as if it's their own. There is a grace in that. It's actually a very good thing. But to answer the bigger question that I think you were alluding to, is then procreation needed for marriage, or like if someone can't consummate or
no, because if you can't have kids, then obviously God's trying to say He doesn't want you to have kids at that point. So if you're adopting someone, like obviously adoption's a great thing, but at the same time is it going against what He wants, or is that what He wants from you? He wants you to adopt. Like, you know what I mean?
yes, go.
Let's not get into the habit of thinking that God does bad things like make you infertile. Sometimes things are because they are.
Yeah.
You don't need to have babies to be procreative. You just have to be open to life.
Okay.
So what's important is that you're open to life.
Okay.
and you don't keep a barrier between you, but be a contraceptive or any other way. So yeah, openness to life rather than making life.
Okay, that answers my question.
But yeah, I don't think God made someone infertile.
We'll get to the scenario questions a bit later, but we had a question.
Well, so next week is on sex and all of this topic, so let's try and stray away from it.
Done.
This may touch on his point, but I just want to say, like, say they're faithful and stuff, and they do IVF. Is that like a mortal sin? Because like it's not normal. Like, does that take them out of that set of grace?
If they know what they're doing is wrong, if they know IVF is wrong and they do it, then it's mortal. But if they've never heard of anyone telling them IVF is wrong, then they can't be held accountable for that sin. Alrighty, but we'll get into that a little more. But it's a great question to ask because not enough people know about it. Alright.
Doesn't that take you away from the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in that aspect?
Or
Because like if you believe in, like you said, like a woman doesn't want to fall pregnant and like I want to keep my body the way it is, or like, you know, wanting not to have kids at that point or whatever, and you said that marriage is the marriage bed of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It doesn't mean it doesn't connect, but are they thinking in their head like it doesn't connect?
so I get what you're saying, and it's probably why the reason I married you. This is my wife, by the way. Is that we forget that marriage is meant to be a love. It's an institution of love first. So we get kind of sidetracked with the procreative aspect. We focus on having children rather than embracing our partner as if we're looking at God Himself. Alrighty? And the reason why it reflects the Trinity as well is, like we said, the love between the Trinity is eternal. It's fully self-giving, fully self-sacrificial. Can anyone here ever imagine? I say this because divorce rates are crazy. I think 60% of marriages now end in divorce or something. And the Catholics aren't that far behind either. Okay? But if there's anyone here that had the reason to divorce his wife, would it not be Christ? Think about it for a second. How much do we sin? How much do we cheat? How much do we lie? If anyone was justified to leave the church, don't you think it would be Christ?
Yes.
2,000 years of putting up with us almost, but He doesn't. He stays. And that's a sign for something later on when we talk about annulments. But think about it. We can never ever imagine Christ divorcing His church. And that should be the attitude we enter into marriage with as well. That's what you should be. That's what you're entering into. Next slide. Now, this is the juicy part of the talk. Now that we've established what marriage is, what we need, and what marriage needs to be valid, remember we said baptism. I have a table up here that has every single combination of marriage you ever need to worry about. You can actually take a photo of this if you want, so follow your phone, take a photo.
Between people, at least.
Sorry?
Between people, at least.
Between people? What do you mean? Oh, between a valid sacramental marriage.
No pairs allowed.
I'll take it on with that. Alright? So, I'll explain the table very quickly when he's taking your photos. So, none of us ever read titles, so I'm going to read it for you. Okay? Requirements for validity. So what makes a marriage valid first? All of these, provided divine law is observed. Okay, I forgot to mention, for marriage to be valid now, okay, the church has instituted what's called canonical form. So, divine law. So it's essentially what the church decrees to be necessary for marriage. What that means is, you have to get married in a Catholic ceremony. It's binding on you. What is a Catholic ceremony? In a church. Preferably Catholic. One man, one woman. 2 witnesses. Okay? They are the canonical form. Can anyone guess as to why that's mandated? Even though we just said that the sacrament is only conferred by the couple, we don't need the priest. Why does the church mandate Catholic ceremony for people? Anyone have a shot?
Because the church is the bride of Christ, and our marriage is supposed to reflect Jesus' marriage to the church.
Correct, but there's a deeper reason.
To get the church's blessing?
Yeah, but come to church. Why does it need the church blessing if the couple themselves render the sacrament? These are the questions people asked.
The grace of the sacrament.
The grace enters the couple through their union.
Don't you got to be in the presence of Jesus who's in the tabernacle?
Yes and no. Because remember we said the couple themselves make Jesus present. The reason why is, for so long, the church did it to combat what was called clandestine marriages. If you remember this word, fair enough. If you can't, it's all good. What clandestine marriages were. Say, for example, I was Nathan, beautiful man. Say Nathan was the prince of a castle. Okay? And he had a crush on the maid that worked there, or served there. And he's like, hey, I love you, you know, let's get married. And it's only between them two, they exchange vows in the woods or something. And he commits to her and only her. Okay? And then they have kids. Beautiful. 5 years later or 2 years later, a princess comes to the castle. And Nathan is decreed to be wedded to her in a couple months' time. And Nathan goes, oh, she's a princess, blah, blah, blah. What goes up to, he goes, I love you, I want to marry you. Okay? Now Nathan marries the new princess.
What about the wood nymph?
Now he has kids from her. Then the first woman comes and says, but Nathan, you married me, we have 2 kids. What happens then? What does he say?
She's rich.
No?
It's not
See
sacramental.
where you're getting at, is it for witness?
So the prince then says, who's going to believe you?
Oh.
If marriage was only ever conferred by the 2 people, then who is there to prove that these were wedded together?
Yeah.
So the church is like, this is happening too much. We need to reform it, and that's what the Council of Trent did. In 1500s, it reformed everything from it. It mandated that every Catholic couple who's baptized gets married in a church. Why? Because our brother just said, to have it in the wedding, essentially to have it in the house of God, as God is your witness. That's what the priest is there, only as an MC. He's there as an officiator of the church. Okay? That's why you can invite the bishop or 10 priests if you want. It has to fulfill that condition. A priest needs to be present. And in extreme circumstances, someone else. Okay? You have to have 2 witnesses. Why? Because if anything happens, you know, if Anthony was married and I see Anthony with another girl and his best man is Joey, Joey's like, bro, what are you on about? I was at your wedding. You forgot you're married? And if the church needs to investigate, they'll go to Joey as well. If Anthony is trying to avoid the church, they'll go to Joey. They'll go to the maid of honor. So please, when you choose your maid of honor and best man, you probably want to make sure that they at least know their faith a little bit. That they at least understand what you're entering into. Because if the couple don't know what they're entering into, marriage is invalid, we'll get into that. But if your own friends don't know what you're entering into, then why the heck are you putting them in a place of honor? So the church understood this, and the mandated canonical form. So now that we understand this, let's go through the scenarios. How this table works. I'm not sure if you can see, but Catholic and Catholic, in a Catholic ceremony, what is the marriage considered? Valid what?
Sacramentally.
Sacramental marriage. Catholic and a Catholic, in a non-Catholic ceremony, what's considered? Straight out invalid.
So civil marriage is considered.
So you can't get married on the beach, can't get married in Thailand on some sort of mountain. You have to get married in a church with 2 witnesses and a priest. Why? Because you're baptized, you should know better. Okay? Who's going? Yes.
So civil marriage is invalid, essentially.
Civil marriage is not invalid, we're getting to it. Okay? Because we're getting to it.
JC,
What's happening here? Yeah.
how about in the case where it's a church marriage, but the priest went outside with them into the garden and took all the paperwork?
So we call
So
that
it's not,
elopement.
point I was trying to make, it's not, when we say in a church, we don't necessarily, it's the best form, but we don't mean the church building. We mean as celebrated by the church.
Correct. So, officiated
by the church.
Officiated by the church, which usually means in the church, as Nathan said, if the priest and you want to elope together outside the church, for example, usually will happen in, but it will still be fine. It still is valid. Because it's the couple that makes the sacrament work.
So long as it has canonical form.
Sorry, I just want to clarify. If a couple wishes to get married outside of the building of the church, has to get permission from their church.
Correct, and we'll get to that just over here. That's correct. Alright? So guys, just quickly, because this is what, you're going to be invited to weddings, you're going to be invited to your mates' weddings and other people's weddings. You need to know what you're going to.
Yeah,
This is why we have this right now. Okay? Catholic and non-Catholic Christian, who would that be? Protestants. Because they're still considered Christians.
Orthodox.
In a Catholic ceremony, it's what? So we can marry Protestants. Okay? Provided that they are what? Baptized properly.
Don't they have to become Catholic though?
No. That's the beauty about this. They can stay as that because they're still baptized. Remember, sacramental marriage is only valid when both parties are baptized.
Alright.
Protestants are still, most of them, not all of them, most of them are still validly baptized.
Question.
Yes.
In Lebanon, right? For example, an Orthodox man
We're
marries
getting to Orthodox, we're not up to there yet.
a Catholic man marries an Orthodox woman.
We're getting there, not up there yet.
Okay.
Okay, hold it. I know you're excited.
One second.
Especially, I know who's Orthodox in the crowd, but we're excited too, don't worry. Alrighty. Catholic and unbaptized. Who will be unbaptized? Muslims, Hindus, atheists. Well, you got to make sure that they're not baptized and they just think they're not. Okay? In a Catholic ceremony, it's a. Why would it be natural marriage, even though one of them is baptized?
Because both have to be baptized.
We should both need to be baptized. Is this confusing anyone? Based on what we said, do you understand why that is? Because both parties have to be baptized. If I'm not baptized, can I receive communion?
No.
So if I'm not baptized, can I have a sacramental marriage? Same thing. Baptism is the gateway to all sacraments.
But sorry, when we say valid, what it means?
Valid means that you've met the conditions for proper form of marriage. So
For a
you
natural
met,
marriage.
you met the conditions for a marriage. Remember those three I showed you before?
Yeah.
Consent,
difference.
commitment, fruitfulness.
But
Alright.
yeah, but why the second is not valid?
But it's not in the church. It's not in the Catholic ceremony.
Yeah.
There's no two witnesses. It's on the beach, somewhere random. Okay, you have to present your vows essentially as your, before God, essentially. Okay, we're now getting to the juicy ones.
Sorry, can I
Yes.
ask a question?
Yes.
What, is there a condition to marry non-Christian? Are there any condition to make it valid or?
So as long as it's in the Catholic ceremony up here, you're good. As long as you don't get married in church. So if I'm a Catholic man and I marry a Protestant woman in my church, no problem. If you're a Catholic woman marrying a Protestant man in our church, no problem. As soon as you get married in a Protestant church, then we have problems because then we end up here. Catholic and a non-Catholic Christian in a non-Catholic ceremony, the valid sacramental marriage, if dispensation from the bishop is given to avoid canonical form. That's what Tia was touching on as well. So if you're a Catholic woman and you fall in love with a Protestant man, okay, no one's here to tell you who should and shouldn't love. But, we'll get to that. And you want to get married in your husband's church, if you do not go to the bishop and get this dispensation, which means just a written excuse slip or written slip, permission to do so otherwise, you have not met the requirements of marriage. So your marriage is,
Sorry, Jesse,
we're
question.
living in sin, it's illicit. So there's sin attached to it.
So is there a chance that the bishop would not grant that? Or would he? So he would, okay,
He will.
right. So most likely you can't, it's not valid.
Most likely you can.
Most likely you can, you can't. Okay.
So I'll get down to here a bit more and explain what it is. So the bishop is very important. More than we
Jesse,
can.
maybe finish the table questions.
Okay, let's finish the table. Okay, let's go through it quickly. So, Catholic and Orthodox Christian. Orthodox brothers and sisters, are they validly baptized?
Yes.
Okay, do they see us as validly baptized?
No.
That's the issue.
I know.
Only with the exception of 2 or 3 Orthodox churches. Unfortunately, and we can get into this if you want, most Orthodox people, Orthodox churches do not recognize our baptism. And to it's not just me saying it. If you go to if I get married and go to an Orthodox church, if my wife is Orthodox, for example, heaven forbid, and I get married in my church, okay, I'll get married in her church. They actually have to say a prayer over me. Essentially, it's like a conditional baptism. They baptize me then and there. And if an Orthodox woman wants to marry outside her church, they excommunicate her. Because in their eyes, then you're not baptized. You're marrying someone not part of Christ. I'm not saying this to scare you, and this is true. Because we just understood what the value of baptism is. Baptism is a full entry into God's church. Right? So we have no problem with it. We actually have no problem with it. Okay? Everyone else does. Because we recognize their baptism. Because they can still considered Catholic and non-Catholic Christian. It's a valid sacramental marriage in our eyes. Okay? But however, if you get married in Orthodox ceremony, it's not valid. As in, unless, so it's valid, sacramental marriage, licit if approval obtained from the bishop, illicit, otherwise still valid, which means there's still sin attached to it. And for all the women here, and I say this more to the women, okay, because usually follow the church of your husband. If you end up marrying an Orthodox guy, please keep in touch with your faith, because the church will give you the permission, provided you agree to remain Catholic all your life, practicing Sunday Mass, confession, sacraments, and if you agree to baptize the children Catholic. And this is why the church mandates preparation lessons, so you can have these conversations.
Why don't they before you recognize their baptism?
Correct, because unfortunately, although they are validly baptized, they are not in communion with the church. They are schismatics, they've cut themselves off. Does that make sense?
Not really for your husband.
Okay, I'll explain it.
Not really, I don't understand.
Okay, so Orthodox people are validly baptized in our eyes. Okay, because there's only one baptism. There's no Orthodox baptism, there's no Catholic baptism, there's no Maronite baptism. There's one baptism.
So I think what Angela's saying is, then why can't they just be baptized even if they're raised? Why can't they just
Yeah, so you can remain what you are, but if you're the Catholic party, you cannot leave communion with your church. So you must remain in communion with the Catholic Church. And because the Catholic Church takes the position of, remember this is the word the church uses, it takes the position of primacy. Which means the Catholic Church has to come first in every scenario.
But then why would they approve then that in the first place for them to get married?
Because they're validly baptized, it's the couple that confer the sacrament.
But if they're validly baptized, then why can't they baptize?
You know what, Ange? I think they named this because it happened in so many situations, so they had to address what happens in a situation where a Catholic person and
It's more of a canonical thing than a
So baptism, it does not mean you're in communion. Sorry, baptism is not does not equate to, like you're equating baptism and schismatics as in it doesn't really matter. You can be baptized, but if you become Orthodox, which the Orthodox Church became, you're cutting yourself off from the Catholic Church.
Okay, because your name is Orthodox.
Correct. Well, by nature, the Orthodox Church means that. Correct. In our eyes.
In our eyes, right?
Yes.
So, like, really, in our eyes, if you baptize your children Orthodox, they still
No.
can.
If you baptize your children Catholic, which means they're in communion with the church, they understand papal, they accept papal infallibility, the dogmas of Mary, purgatory, all that stuff which Orthodox differ on. Okay, they don't believe in those things. The Catholic Church must take prime place in the marriage. That's why one of the conditions that the bishop will discuss with the couple is, especially if you're marrying a Muslim, are you going to agree to have the children baptized Catholic? If you say it does happen. If you say no, then the bishop can, in his knowledge, so I don't mean to be forceful. If the bishop's, if you don't convince the bishop, he can actually not give you the dispensation.
So if you lie about that, if you lie and say I'm going to baptize my
Yep.
kids Catholic, and then it doesn't end up happening, is that a valid marriage?
The church would have to go off what you tell her, but if you lie within yourself, then you carry that sin for the rest of your life. Especially if it becomes an issue later on. You can lie in that moment, but through the grace of God, you might actually baptize your kids Catholic.
No, but so you know how that dispensation was granted?
Yeah.
The dispensation was granted based on a lie, so that would render the dispensation also
Pretty much.
a lie, so it would be
Alright.
So it doesn't matter if it's Orthodox, it can be anything.
Technically, yes, because we get down to the bottom of the table.
Honestly, that's a shame.
It is a shame. Because we forget what the purpose of marriage is. We're not just marrying who we want, we're married because it reveals the Trinity. Marriage is meant to reveal greater than what we are. It's not just Old Testament stuff, guys. The sacrament was what it was, and then Christ elevates it to a sacrament. He fuses it to himself. So if he fuses it to himself, should you not have the responsibility to render Christ present in every marriage? Amen. But if you marry someone outside of communion, outside of the flock, and you abandon your faith, that is mortal sin. It's apostasy. That's literally the word for it. That's why the church says you must maintain your faith, and actually the word for it is you must take a prenuptial declaration of promise. That's what it's called. So if I'm a Orthodox woman, Catholic woman marrying an Orthodox man, the bishop in this meeting will actually make a prenuptial rule declaration of promise that I will remain Catholic the rest of my life and baptize the children Catholic. And it takes, does that make sense to everyone? So be careful who you choose as your partner, because these issues are going to make friction in your marriage. So it's easier to marry a Catholic, but we're not always about what's easier. The church allows us to marry whoever we want, provided that we maintain the true meaning of marriage. I want to move on with the conditions, because I know we spent a lot of time on this table already. Let's go to this one. Catholic and unbaptized marriages. So Catholic and Muslims. A lot of us here have friends and family that are married to Muslims. I know I do. Okay? If you get married in a non-Catholic ceremony, so if you're a Catholic woman marrying a Muslim man, when you go right to bed in front of the sheikh, your marriage is actually a natural marriage, provided you get permission from the bishop. Because what we said before, both parties need to be baptized to be a sacramental marriage. So you're allowed to get married, but Christ's... so you can get married, but it's a natural marriage. It's a marriage on the level of the Old Testament. It's licit, but you have to get permission. Now I said this to someone in discussion one day, and they said to me, girls and guys who are marrying Muslims, most likely if they're doing that, obviously it's a generalization, but most likely if they're doing that, they don't care what the bishop has to say. Okay, it's like, who's the bishop to tell me who I can and can't marry? Okay, if that's the case and you do not get a dispensation, your marriage is invalid, straight up invalid. And until you come back to the bishop or to the church and ratify your marriage properly, or it's called convalidation, your marriage is invalid if you're marrying an unbaptized person outside of your church. Nancy?
But if it's a natural marriage, that's only if you get divorced.
Correct. And that's why we'll come back to what's called the Pauline privilege, where, let's say, for example, you did marry a Muslim man, okay, and then you wanted to come back to your faith, and there was a lot of friction there, and your Muslim partner didn't let it happen, because that happens. And you meet a good Catholic guy in this scenario, and you want to marry that Catholic guy, the church has a provision, which we'll discuss later, called the Pauline privilege, exactly for this scenario. That frees them from the old marriage, and their new marriage dissolves the old. We'll get into that later.
So don't you think that this is a sin?
It's not a sin, because...
To have your children as Muslim?
No. So that's why we say, you have to remain Catholic your whole life, like we said. That's why we said the bishop has to make sure this happens. It's on the bishop's neck, because he's responsible for every soul in his care. The bishop has to make sure that Samir, that your daughter is going to stay Catholic and baptize the children Catholic. Even if the husband does not like it, it only takes one parent to baptize the kids.
You mean for the Orthodox, but
even for the Muslims, even if you marry an atheist, even if you marry a Hindu.
Yeah, so...
If a woman is going to get married to a Muslim man, behind the sheikh,
that's right.
She has to become a Muslim. So she apostatizes.
And that's the issue that we say here. That depending on how, in the Muslim tradition, yes, but that's what I'm saying. That no matter what you do, if I tomorrow say I'm atheist, if I tomorrow renounce my faith, God forbid, and say I'm Muslim, I'm still baptized Catholic.
Right.
Even if I go write my Deb in the Sheikh's book and I profess I'm Muslim, okay, I'm still baptized Catholic. I'm just living in sin.
Mortal sin.
Mortal sin come in.
And if you get married, it's invalid.
If you don't go get the bishop's permission first. Because you might be against your faith now, but in 10 years' time, something might happen. Okay, let's move on. Sorry guys, I know this is getting a bit tedious, but like I guarantee you've never heard this before. And no one knows when you hear this next. Right, so what's your name?
Christian.
Christian, God bless.
I've got a question.
Sure.
So, for divorce, let's say both are, for example, one Catholic,
Yep.
and after they get married, one person decides to separate from the faith and go completely away, and they don't want to go back, and then a divorce happens.
Yep.
Is that considered sin, or
If they're married to a Muslim and they want to split
no,
from
if they're both Catholic, but one person decides they swap their faith, or they go completely away from their faith, and then they divorce.
Yeah.
What would happen then? Is that allowed?
The church would say they're still validly married. They're still sacramentally married. Just because you do what you want to do doesn't mean marriage is gone. That's why the church recommends you separate first before you go through an annulment phase. It's actually required. We'll get into that a little bit later.
Just a question.
Yeah.
If a marriage is not valid,
So where are we? So where are we? What's the scenario?
All coming attention from experience, Orthodox and Catholic.
Yeah.
Obviously, Catholic marrying Orthodox, and
As in you're the man, you're the Catholic man marrying an Orthodox woman?
parents,
Okay.
mum Catholic, dad Orthodox,
Okay.
and has Orthodox children. Is obviously the marriage, because she didn't baptize the children Catholic, can she ever make the marriage valid if it was invalid?
So if the Orthodox party wants to become a Catholic, thankfully, the church makes it very easy. All they got to do is see the bishop or priest, mainly the bishop first, and make a public affirmation of faith, which means the creed. They've got to say the Catholic creed, preferably in front of the church, okay? And they get the blessing, and they're Catholic.
I don't think that's what
No, but like,
Is that what you're saying?
So the marriage is deemed invalid.
Okay. So
and
what would
the-
make it invalid? That's
yeah,
what I'm
well,
asking you.
So like the bishop, we didn't.
Okay,
the
so
kids
we're
were
here.
baptized Catholic.
The kids weren't baptized, or they were?
They were baptized, but
Okay.
not Catholic.
Okay, fair enough.
So the marriage would be deemed invalid.
Correct.
How can it become valid? Is there a way? Or
100%. So the church, you have to do what's called a convalidation, which means you come back to the Catholic Church, okay, and they essentially ratify the conditions that you missed out on. So then you would renew your vows in a Catholic ceremony, okay, and if you were never validly baptized, you get baptized, but we understand Orthodox are. So all you have to do is make an affirmation of faith. Does that answer your question?
yeah.
Like JC, sorry,
Yeah.
isn't it like the fact that wouldn't it, as in they wouldn't have to do it in a Catholic church, but if can they go to the bishop and say, we got married?
Yeah, sorry, yes, you're right.
As in, and say, can you approve of us, I'm going to baptize my kids Catholic? They're baptized Orthodox, I'm gonna baptize my kids Catholic.
You don't rebaptize them, but you go back to the bishop to get
To get
dispensation.
that,
Yes.
yeah, to get
Exactly
that.
right.
Because there are many people like this.
That's right. They are. There are many people like this.
Sorry, I just want to understand something.
Yep.
Maybe it's from clarify as well. Obviously, there's a lot of people because there's a lot of people in our parents' generation that are in that specific situation.
Yep.
But I think they genuinely don't know better. So given that they don't know better, I guess like it's up to God at the end. I know this is like the laws and everything, all the canon or everything.
Yep.
But like is it still invalid? Like it's still invalid even if both parties are unaware of the requirements.
So if they're unaware of what they're doing, then it's obviously no fault of their own.
Yeah.
Okay. But if they're, for example, if God was to look at their marriage, He would see it as they're not married. Okay. And unfortunately, that's what it is, because we have to understand that we are bound to the sacrament.
Yeah.
So we have to, in order for us to receive the sacrament the way it's meant to be done, we need to satisfy the conditions for it. Okay, I know this is probably for you guys for the first time you're hearing most of this, but this is good. Our job today was to inspire questions in your mind. Okay?
But in Orthodox eyes,
Yeah.
it's valid.
In Orthodox eyes, it all depends on who's marrying who. Because if the
But
Orthodox
a girl
man is married,
is married an Orthodox guy,
Yeah.
they baptize their children in the Orthodox church.
Yeah.
In their eyes, it's valid.
in the Orthodox church,
Yeah.
it's valid because
Yeah.
you belong to their church. But in our eyes, you're validly baptized, but you're schismatic. You've cut yourself from God. And for many of us here, or not many of us, but for some of us here, has anyone ever told you that, like, if you're an Orthodox, you're actually cut from the Catholic Church? So you've cut yourself from the Catholic Church. That's probably for another day, but understand that. That's why if you are Orthodox in this room, and you are married or thinking of marrying someone, you need to understand that this is how the church is, because marriage is not a joke. We just said before, it's meant to reflect the Trinity. It's a lifelong commitment. If you don't understand these things, then you need to deepen your understanding of marriage. Okay? Because you realize when people don't understand marriage, that's when they kind of get lost in this. They end up marrying whoever and they don't care.
That if they got married into a different church because the bishop didn't allow them, they went and get married in a different church, still not valid as well.
If you go against the bishop and you go against the mission, it's yeah.
Maybe you already explained this, but
Yeah.
I just want to clarify. So if say a man or a woman who's Orthodox married Catholic other partner.
So man is Catholic.
Man is Catholic,
Yep.
woman's Orthodox, they got married, came to church. That's that one. You said that, right? It's about, yes.
Correct, because you follow the faith of the Father essentially.
But they don't need to get a dispensation from somewhere else.
So if you're here, you're Catholic and a non-Catholic Christian in a Catholic ceremony,
Yeah.
valid sacramental marriage.
Because I have someone that I know, because half my family's Orthodox, someone that I know wanted to get married here, and they said they weren't allowed until they got a dispensation from the Orthodox bishop. Is that?
Especially an Orthodox bishop.
So that it's the
Technically-
same like that letter that we allow
Yeah.
them to get married.
So for that, it's more of a, as Anthony said, it's a canonical, legal thing almost, because they're still part of a church community. And if anything, it's probably done to make sure that there isn't any issues, or they could be running away from their bishop. They could have never spoken to the Orthodox bishop in their life.
They never have.
Okay, and that's why the church would say,
practice
go
as
and make yourself
Catholics,
known.
But they were baptized as Orthodox.
Yeah.
And they just never, like, they grew up in a Catholic church because it was, or whatever, that was the right
Yeah.
thing. So you don't know about that dispensation, like, you're not sure.
Yeah, unless you know the exact conditions, but it is in, from what I've read,
Yeah.
it's, if the church sends you back to the church to make things right there, it's either your church does not know who you are,
Yeah.
okay, or legally, they have a responsibility to understand who's in their church.
Yeah.
Alright. Does everyone understand this? Just quickly as well, non-Catholic Christian and unbaptized, so a Protestant marrying an atheist, valid natural marriage. Okay, a Protestant who's not validly baptized, assuming. And unbaptized, so two Muslims, any marriage recognized by the state or their sheikh, we still see them as a valid natural marriage. So the church would look at a Muslim couple and go, you are married in the same way that Mary and Joseph were married, as in, or the way David,
Abraham and Sarah.
Abraham and Sarah were married. Because it's marriage on the level of the Old Testament. Because even though they might not be baptized, for Christ's grace to be present in their marriage, remember, it's the two couple that make the sacrament happen. Remember that. The church does not get involved. They only got involved to mandate this because of the abuse of marriage. Understand? It's just there as a witness. Any questions on this so we can move on? Charbel.
This the third last one.
This one?
It took me out
So read it out for me.
Non-Catholic Christian and non-Catholic Christian, any ceremony, the valid sacramental marriage.
Okay. Who can answer this question for Charbel? I'll read it again. So a Protestant and a Protestant in any ceremony get married and it's a sacramental marriage.
As long as their baptism is valid.
So like down on the beach, they can get sacramental.
As long as they're
That's right.
baptized.
They're baptized, so they fulfill the four.
So what's the difference between Catholic and a non-Catholic Christian in a non-Catholic ceremony?
Catholics have more rules.
No. Well, it's answers like on the group chat today, how cryptic but true. Okay? So if you're Catholic, you are bound by the Catholic rules. If you're Protestant, you're not bound by Catholic rules. Does that make sense to everyone?
But in the eyes of God,
So in the eyes of God, I can't hold Charbel. So if Charbel's Protestant and he gets married to his Protestant girlfriend, the church can't come in and go, but they should have got married in a Catholic church. They're not Catholic.
because
They're not bound by the same standard
How's it a valid sacramental?
because they're still baptized.
as long as their
All it
baptism is
takes is for you
valid.
to be baptized for it to be sacramental.
So the church doesn't have a monopoly on baptism. I'll say it again. The church,
They don't believe in the word.
correct. The church does not have a monopoly on baptism because Christ instituted the sacrament for all. Okay, so that's what we said. If the Protestant is validly baptized, they can. And actually, I'll tell you a story. My cousin, my mum will tell you, my brother will tell you. My first cousin, she was baptized Protestant. So even though half my family is Protestant, half my family is Maronite. She was baptized Protestant. She married a Protestant man in their church. At the time, I didn't know this. And I'm like, you're not getting married in the Catholic Church. I can't come to your wedding. It's against my faith. She goes, yeah, that's what it is. I didn't go to her wedding. 2 years later, I learned this. And what did I say no to? What did I say no to? So I called her and I apologized. And I invited her out to say congratulations properly.
Did you not get that?
You know what? Actually, I invited her out for dinner. I said no to a valid natural marriage. So I could have actually gone to that wedding. Here's the opposite example. I'll give you an example. I had a Catholic friend, so not a Baptist friend, so a Protestant guy marrying a Catholic woman. I begged them to get married in the Catholic ceremony because he asked me to be his best man. I said respectfully, I can't. I'm not here to put myself on a pedestal, but if you're in a position, you should pray for the grace to say no. Just because someone asks you, doesn't mean you get to put your faith to the side. He asked me, why can't you? That's because I cannot be an official witness to an invalid marriage if your fiance doesn't get married in the church or at least sees the bishop. And thankfully he had the grace to understand that I try to be a good Catholic, I try to be a very good Catholic, and he respected it, and he loved me more for it. Like, understand, this is important. Otherwise we're just learning it for no reason. Go get married whoever you want and stuff your faith. Take your faith seriously, need to know these things. What was your name, sir? Michelle.
Sorry, so is it only, you only weren't able to go because they asked you to be a witness for it?
Correct.
If you were to just attend, is that still allowed?
So I said no to being a best man because I'm an official witness. What I said before, in order to perform, you are the official witness of investigation if the church comes and wants to annul this couple. So being a best man is a very big responsibility. I said no, I can't because you're already interested in something that I don't find correct. So after speaking to his fiancée, I said, look, I'm not here to get between your marriage. But as a Catholic to a Catholic, because she's not practicing, she's a Catholic but she doesn't go to church. I said, if there's ever a time in your life where you want to ever show some sort of, charity to a bishop, let it be this one time. She goes, I'll think about it. I've done my part. I've advocated for the correct terms. And under that condition, I said no. My wife and I still went to that wedding. Because under that condition, she was open to doing it, just not on the day. So the fact that she was open to one day validating the marriage properly is enough for us. But here's the thing, if I never said that, she would never have even thought of it.
So the only thing is you can't go and be an official witness, but you're still allowed to attend.
Provided you actually, don't go with the second part, I actually went and tried to talk to the couple to do it properly. How many of us here do that? I got invited to a wedding in Bali. No, you actually talk to your, especially if they're close to you. Right? How much of a faith Catholic you want to be?
We recently went to a wedding of an Orthodox man married to a Protestant woman.
Orthodox man, Protestant woman.
In a Protestant ceremony.
Yeah.
What is that category?
So we have a non-Catholic Christian marrying a non-Catholic Christian, and in his ceremony, it's so you can go.
Orthodox and the Protestant.
Oh, sorry, Orthodox, Protestant.
Yeah, not Catholic.
Because they're validly baptized. So that would be.
That was the right one, bro.
Yeah. You're right, because they separate themselves from the church. Yeah, they're not bound by Catholic rules. Exactly right. Just like when Charbel said it. Right? So remember, if you're Catholic, you're bound by canonical form. If you're not a Catholic, the rules don't apply to you in that way. You can go to that way.
I went to that wedding.
So what happens is
I love this question. Yeah.
in a Catholic ceremony and it's valid, but your witnesses are Protestant and atheist.
Good question.
I know, Protestant and Orthodox.
It wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter because if the couple themselves confer the sacrament, but if you, in the case where something happens, you want to ask for an annulment, okay, they will be called into question, okay, they have to give proper evidence. And in that process, it's a very spiritual process as well as a legal process. So you hope that abide by what the church needs. If then everything goes, stuff you, go to hell, then essentially they cannot advocate for the couple, and the church would have to investigate the matters on its merits. So the church doesn't need the best man and the man of honor to cooperate, but it's a big help if they do. Because someone asked on the group chat, on the St. Charbel's group chat, why annulments take so long? Sometimes it's because of situations like that, where the parties just aren't cooperative, or their official witnesses aren't cooperative, or they just lie to each other. Alrighty? So that's a very big question. Thanks.
Going off of that.
Yep.
If the best man is Protestant in a Catholic marriage, but the groom is Protestant and the bride is Catholic, but they're getting married in the Catholic church.
Say that again for me.
Okay. Woman is Catholic.
Yeah.
the man is Protestant.
Yep.
Best man is Protestant.
Yep.
Is he allowed to be witnessing a Maronite church? For the
The
marriage?
witnesses don't matter. It's more so the couple as long as they've sufficed these
Because
conditions.
Maronite is very like strict.
It's more strict for baptisms than it is for witnesses in the church. Yeah. Witnesses is just there that, like we said in the olden days,
So you can't have a Protestant godfather in a Maronite baptism.
you can't have two Protestant people in a baptism. As
One or the other.
correct. One
Oh,
and
so you have been godfather and a Protestant godfather.
yeah.
That's valid.
Provided they will the good of the church. Alright? Let's keep going. I know we're going to start tangent. But guys, I want to thank you so much. I know this is a lot to absorb. And please understand, it's probably that you've probably never ever heard of this, and that's fine. My job is always to inspire questions. And I'll be here after as well to help with any of your scenarios. But we need to get through, because we're still going to talk about annulments very quickly. Alrighty? So, evolution of marriage. Nathan, you want to help me with this one? You'll know what it is when it comes up. Next, Chloe. So from the start, we see a timeline of marriage. We see a progression of marriage. We see marriage evolve into what Christ wants it to be. From the start, the first marriage, like we said, the perfect form. Adam and Eve fulfill the conditions perfectly. They fully give each other. Eve was made from Adam. Like, you cannot be fully consented more than that. He loves her. He's in awe of her. Okay? It's a natural marriage, but Christ hadn't died yet. Baptism wasn't a sacrament. Okay? But it was the most perfect natural marriage there was. Okay? Adam and Eve, we see that there. Then what we see throughout the whole Old Testament and Jesus' time, a degradation of marriage. We see polygamy happen in the Old Testament. Remember, that's why I started with the Old Testament, New Testament. We see divorce being allowed. We see these things allowed by God because of the hardness of hearts of people. Just like the way they are today. Then what happens when Christ comes in, he sees how everything's gone to shit, sorry, and he returns it to its pristine, perfect condition. He elevates it. He renews it. He raises it to a sacrament. It should be capital S. Raises it to a sacrament. Where no polygamy is allowed, and it's indissoluble. It can never end, no matter what. We'll get into that later, but it can never end at all. Marriage is till what? Death. It's a covenant that you pay for with your life. So that's why when you die, you're free from your vow. You can get married again. So widows are allowed to get married, if you guys don't know, because their partners died. You're free from your vows. You can't remain married if your partner's dead. How can you? There has to be a love and a lover, a beloved and a beloved, right?
It's the way you word it.
It's reciprocal, did I?
You're free when they lie.
You're free from the vow when you die, yes. Okay?
Does that mean I get to kill you tonight?
Actually, we'll get to that point. That's actually that's actually the marriage is actually annulled if people do that. If you kill me to marry my best mate, okay, and you actually marry my best mate, it's an immediate annulment. It's an invalid marriage. You can't kill your partner to marry someone else. We'll get to that. So this is what it is. So the reason why marriage became infinite and concrete to a divine level is because when Christ elevated the marriage to a sacrament, made it infinite and eternal, the church now has this term. This is what the church judges you on or measures you on later in the future. If you're ready for marriage. This is why we mandate marriage classes. So everyone here who goes, oh, marriage classes. Bloody oath, this is why we do it. Okay? Oh, can't see the words? Sorry. So the words are irrevocable consent and indissolubility are the two words the church uses. No deceit, it's not forced, like we said before. You're there from a free act of yourself. Not because there's a $2 million dowry or whatever it is, I'm going to marry him and when you guys are getting money, or it's arranged marriage, you're forced, whatever it is. You have to, nothing can be deceived. I haven't hidden anything from myself. I'm not a secret drug dealer or a rapist or a murderer and I haven't told my wife. I cannot enter the agreement in deceit. I cannot have led my partner astray. Okay? If there's something about me that she needs to know and I've withheld it from her, that's deceit. It does not suffice this. Your marriage can become annulled.
I was going to ask you, does that mean annulment?
Correct. Later on, it is unconditional, like we said. It's not like I love you if you get that house after we married. There's no conditions. I love you forever. Even if, God forbid, you have an accident and your body parts are mutilated or you lose a leg, whatever it is. Okay, it's unconditional forever. Even if we have children, 4 children God blesses with, and they're all Down syndrome, it's unconditional. Okay, this is the heaviness. We understand these things when we get married. And finally, you must express this consent, obviously internally. You need to know what you're prepared for, but also externally. You need to be present. You need to essentially consummate your marriage on the wedding night or the day after, because you're too tired. Okay? Next slide.
Oh, it doesn't have to be that, because there's actually a church tradition where you don't consummate for 3 days and you offer your marriage on.
Amen.
Yeah, there's an old, it's a Latin tradition, but so you don't have to do it straight away. But you do have to.
I'll get through this slide very quickly because we've got something to see. So, Chloe, press the button. So, what does it mean to marry? I understand, I told you guys none of these talks are going to be theology of the body, but I'm not going to go through it now because we're short on time, but quickly go, Chloe. So, next again. So, a lot of people have this false conception, especially in the media today, where they see marriage as, oh, I don't want to be someone's possession. Unfortunately, feminism has pretty much adopted this as their commandment. Okay? Marriage, if you guys didn't get the gist today, marriage does not mean you're someone's property and possession. It's a reciprocal, eternal, everlasting exchange of persons, where you will the good of the other in every moment of every day. Okay? Marriage, obviously, like we just said, is essentially you're dying to yourself for the sake of your partner, and your partner does the same. That's why we see in that verse that everyone loves to quote in churches: husbands, love your wives, like Christ loved the church. Women, submit to your husbands, etc., etc. That's why it's there, because it's a reciprocal gift for all time. I'm not going to get into this because the priests do a good job, and there's a lot of content online where it explains it better than I do. Fruitfulness, you need to multiply. You need to be open to life. Raise citizens for the kingdom of God. Okay? What else? I don't know. All good. Ultimately, marriage is about service. Just like we see Christ start his vows. When did Christ's passion start? When did Christ's words start? Last Supper. His vows, remember we said the cross is the marriage bed of Christ. It's the end point of his marriage. But his words, his vows started at the Last Supper. Just like when we get married today. We said the vows in church, we party in between, because technically we see them as married. But they haven't consummated yet. Mostly. most of them, I guess. But, so Christ starts his words, he says his I do's essentially at the Last Supper. Okay? And then the couple say yes with their bodies the night of their wedding, essentially. Just like Christ says yes with his body, forever. So Christ starts his marriage essentially to the church on the Last Supper. And how does he start it? That's why I love this photo. Okay, and for those of you, I'm not here to toot my own horn, but our wedding video went viral, I guess for the right reasons for once. 5 million views on our video, where we still have people messaging us, where I washed my wife's feet. I did it with this in mind. That essentially, what is Christ saying? He's starting his ministry to die to himself as a true husband, as a true life giver. So when I took this, I'm like, I've always said to myself that if I'm going to get married, I want to keep that in mind, that what I'm entering into is my cross, essentially. The cross that's going to sanctify me to heaven. So I thought it would be fitting that to my wife, I would wash her feet. Regardless if it was Chloe or someone else, I had always intended it for my wife. As a gesture to her and to the world, that essentially I'm starting my vows with an act of humility and fulfilling it obviously the night of my marriage and then after. What does Christ do what happens if you reject this? What happens if you think it's something else? Peter, or I think it was Peter, he says, Lord, who are you to wash my feet? I should wash yours. What does Christ say? If you do not let me do this, you have no part in me. If you do not let me love you, if you do not let me let myself give myself to you, you are cutting yourself from me. So then Christ washes the feet of his servants, his apostles. He says, no master is greater than his servant, but I have done this for you, that you may do it to each other.
No servant.
Sorry?
No servant.
So no, thank you. So what servant has his master wash his feet? If men are decreed to be the masters of the home, and the master of the home washed his servant's feet, this should be a no-brainer to us to extend it to our partners. Okay? The reason why I have a photo of a samurai is I love medieval warfare, I love warfare, and samurai dies to himself. The word samurai actually means to serve. Your sword is the word of the emperor. It's no longer John Claude, it's an extension of the emperor's word. And for those of us who really want to know, that's what the Greek word submit means in this verse. To submit is to fall under the mission. God has given every man a mission to die for his church, die for his wife. So just like Christ loved his church, and all women are asked to do is to fall under that mission. Not to obey the man of who the guy is, not to obey John Claude, but to obey the mission that God has given John Claude. So women and men, if you don't know your mission, don't get married just yet. Find the level of mastery in your life. Strive to be good Christians first. That's what dating is for. To discover, is this person worthy of this? Is ready for this? Do you understand what you're entering into? 4 lessons as a marriage trip is not going to be enough. And I say it, and I'm being recorded. It's not enough. But the bare minimum needs to be done. Alrighty? We shouldn't ask for the bare minimum. We should strive to be perfect. Alrighty? Everyone still with me? Men? Men. Next slide. We're almost done. Next. Alrighty. Next. Okay. Remember we said before why divorce was allowed. Can I get somebody to read this passage and we'll understand what? Because they try to corner Christ. They say, wait a second, you're saying X, Y, Z. Moses allowed divorce. Okay, so let's read. Can somebody read that, please? Volunteer?
Sure.
Oh,
Matthew 19. Some Pharisees came to Jesus and asked him, "Is it lawful to divorce?" "Haven't you read," he replied, "that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female, and said, 'For this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate.' Why then," they asked, "did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away?" Jesus replied, "Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard. But it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery."
I'll give it to Nathan. Next.
So I'll try and
The same passage, but in Luke as well. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll try and simplify the next bit and kind of leave it more open to questions and make it a bit interactive. But basically, to start off, Catholics do not have a concept of divorce. It's not a thing for us at all. Some things we do have civil divorces, not as a church, but we understand that, if a couple separates, there can be a civil proceeding of a divorce, where, you separate civilly and you separate your assets, stuff like that. Something we do have is separations. Why would you separate from your partner? I mean, a physical separation. Maybe if they're abusive, if they've been cheating on you and you can't reconcile, things like that. So we have separations. And we have annulments, which we'll get to in a second. But there's no such thing as divorce in the Catholic Church. Marriage is indissoluble, which means it can never ever be broken. So once you're married forever. What are the 3 reasons that marriage is indissoluble?
Yeah. So marriage is soluble for 3 reasons, like we said. First, because love has to be a mutual reciprocation forever. It's mutually self-giving. Second, because it's an image of God's unconditional love for his creation. It reflects the Trinity. And third, because it represents Christ's devotion to his church to Just like his sacrifice once and for all eternal, your word is for eternal as well. It's irrevocable.
And something that many people fail to see is that if marriage was not indissoluble, if it could be ended, then it would have no value at all. Why would you want to enter into something eternal if it wasn't eternal at all? The beauty of marriage is that it lasts forever. That's why we do it. There's, I think in Matthew, later in Matthew, or was it in Luke, there's kind of the divorce clause that always comes up. So I'll kind of,
Matthew 5.
Matthew 5. Do you want to read it? Do you have it on paper?
I do.
So basically, off the top of my head, Jesus says, truly I tell you, you cannot divorce your wife unless for adultery. Now, there's a few interpretations of what that means, because on the surface it sounds like Jesus is allowing divorce. I won't get into all of the interpretations, but in short, they all have the same end, which is that you can't divorce. The most common is that it's referring to a civil divorce, because if someone is cheating on you, or a separation, if someone is cheating on you, you're not, unless obviously the first kind of goal of any situation is to reconcile. As Christians, we should always try and reconcile, even if it is bad. If you can't, then it's okay to separate. If you do get a divorce under that condition, it doesn't mean you can remarry, because sacramentally and naturally, you will be married forever. Do you have any other things to add to that?
I will. The reason why, I guess, Moses, the law of Moses allowed divorce, like we see before, is that it was allowed for the hardness of their heart. But what does he say? This was not as it was in the beginning. It was not the original plan. It was permitted. It was allowed. Because Christ hadn't died yet for his church. He hadn't baptized himself in the church. So there was no eternal aspect of marriage. That's why natural marriages still exist today. And that's all they were up until Christ baptized the church. That's why there was no infiniteness for marriage. Does that make sense to everyone? So when they use this Bible verse, because the Protestants use this Bible verse to allow up to 3 divorces, Orthodox Church take this verse and they abuse it and they allow divorce sometimes. Some Orthodox allow divorce up to 3 times. That's why what happens when you leave the protection of the church, you twist your arguments and your teaching starts to get twisted. Okay? Can we just move on a little bit? Only because we're almost done and we can open up for any questions you want. Alright?
Just that except for sexual immorality.
Yeah, I knew that was going to come up. That's why I chose that. Next. So like we said as well, all these things here, Nathan just did a great job at setting it. So what is marriage if it's not eternal? Essentially, if it's conditional. And we say all these things about love, about marriage. So they have to reveal everything that we've just said. And if you think about it, what was the punishment for adultery? Death. So you could say divorce in the Old Testament was a mercy almost that God allowed to allow the woman or the man to still stay alive. Because if you were considered adulterous, they would stone you to death. But Moses divorced her instead, so they had to keep her alive. It's a kind of an interesting thing, but we see our Lord still trying to show mercy in that aspect.
But it's very different depending on where you read in the Bible as to how a person reacted. For example, when Mary got pregnant, Joseph wanted to quietly divorce her, whereas we see Mary Magdalene later on getting stoned until Christ steps in.
Right. Well, that's what I see. He sought to leave her because she would have been stoned to death.
No, that was more because he didn't feel worthy to be.
That too as well. Correct. But the legal interpretation is that if I publicly shame her, she'll be stoned. So it was more like a mercy type thing as well. Alright, that's why it was allowed, not that it's to be encouraged. Okay, it's the exception, I guess. So, is divorce inevitable or unavoidable? And like Nathan said, there are such circumstances where a divorce would need to happen civilly. Okay, but this might surprise you all, because I know this question is a very big, especially with a lot of friends and family who are from broken households. So next slide, Chloe. So next slide again.
Sorry, they've doubled up for some reason.
Okay.
So
this is what I missed the stars up. Sorry, my mistake. But let's bring up annulments for a second. There's too much writing on the board. That's fine. I'm just got it there in case you want to read it for your own curiosity. Okay. All that you have to understand is that in marriage, this says that just like you have innocent till proven guilty, when you come for an annulment, you are married until you've shown otherwise. So the church employs what's called a defender of the bond.
Okay. Maybe let me just define it in simple terms first.
Okay.
So an annulment is not a Catholic divorce. Many of you think that an annulment is a Catholic divorce. An annulment suggests that the marriage was not valid to begin with, so that there was no marriage. So that's what the annulment process does. So the interviews and the process and the application, it's all to determine if your marriage was valid at the point of marriage, so on the wedding day. Now remember, JC was suggesting that there's many conditions for a valid marriage. That is an openness to life, consent, so you're not being forced, so that you know, free will, and consent. And what's the third thing? Like you're not doing it, you're not forced. So you're doing it, you're entering it freely. So generally, what an annulment council does is they see if any one of those things were not met, and if they're not, then they deem your wedding was your marriage was not valid to begin. So people often ask straight away, what about if the partner cheats, or what if something like that happens? No, it's not a reason to get an annulment, because if a partner cheats, unless he was cheating when you were getting married or before and you didn't know, that's different. But if you cheated after, then your marriage at the point of marriage was still valid. So it's still a valid marriage. It's very unfortunate, it's very sad. You don't have to stay with them if you can't reconcile, but you will be still married forever.
Does that make sense to everyone? Annulments are not a review of a marriage. As Nathan said, it's to show that the conditions of marriage were never met to begin with. That's what annulment is. Yeah.
This is a scenario. Both Catholic, they get married, they don't have obviously. But at some point throughout the marriage, she starts to, her husband starts to abuse her physically. Will that satisfy the ground for annulment, considering the circumstances? They both consented, they both were close around each other to the end.
The only situation I can think of where it would is if he was abusive before and he hid it from her. If he became abusive after they were married, then the marriage is still valid.
So if she leaves him and then gets a relationship with another guy, then she's committing adultery.
Yeah, so she would still be married.
So faith is a faith of hope and forgiveness, even to the wicked.
If you're being abusive before the marriage and you get into the marriage being abusive,
does she know you're being abusive?
My question is, why does it matter? Because it doesn't change the three.
No, you're right. My point was, if you hide that you're abusive.
Like, this has changed the allegations.
Well, you can't
ask him a question. How does it not violate three conditions? If you are an abusive person.
One's truthfulness, so you're just trying to make it good.
Yeah.
The second one is full consent, you both have full consent.
Yeah.
And I'm not
Unconditional.
Full knowledge was the last.
Pretty much it has to be unconditional.
But then, don't you take... So you're trying to say that because you didn't know the person was abusive, you couldn't allow it to be happening?
No, it's the person that was abusive did not have the capacity to understand what is required of marriage. They never rose to the occasion. This is what marriage is supposed to be, and they just essentially didn't care, and they got married.
So there's an additional. You can take it further and say, if someone is hiding something from you, then you don't have the full knowledge to know what you're entering. So that's what would be. No, because it can't be like, oh, I didn't know they don't like banana. Yeah, so that would be an important means. Yes. So, yeah, because that's something serious that's going to affect the success and the, you don't have knowledge of what you're getting into. It has to be something great. It can't be, I discovered they prefer BMWs over Mercedes, and I can't be that like.
Well, you can't say that, oh, I'm still out of love. What happens? I showcase my faith in a very spiritual person. What they're answering now is like a short form, but like in the process of it, it is like you are hounded
intense for good reasons. But that's like the church does that for good reasons, yeah.
Sure.
Let's say you got a Catholic and an Orthodox, and they get married. The bishop allows it, but the bishop says that the kids have to be Catholic, and they would. So that woman said yes to the marriage in the Orthodox Church, based on that, the children being Catholic. What if he goes back on that? Is that grounds for annulment?
If the guy goes back on that word, he has not satisfied the conditions that he promised.
So that wasn't valid.
It's not valid. Until he does it, until he comes back.
The seat has a massive life.
The seat.
So you can get an annulment and then get married.
That's like manipulating her consent.
There's grounds for annulment. Just remember, just because, remember, the church, so the church can give a declaration, an annulment, but essentially, it's just an abbreviation. It's actually called a declaration of nullity. Okay, but until you get a declaration, okay, you're married. But if it's there's something called the impediments to marriage. There are certain things where even if you don't get an annulment, you're already essentially not married. You're already annulled without the church declaring you're annulled. It's just that if the church came and saw that you're one of these cases, rubber stamp, boom, straight away annulled. As opposed to they skip the whole process.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Right.
Are you saying that there's people that can...
There are certain scenarios.
Certain scenarios people be like, no, I definitely wasn't validly married.
Yeah.
And that what they can go on and enter into another relationship if they wish until before the church says something.
Yes.
Because it's so obvious.
Yeah, so there's something called the impediments. I know we kind of jumped a little bit, but I'll get to that and we'll keep along with the topic. But there are essentially 9 impediments to marriage. I'm going to go through, but they're very quick. These, if you fall into one of these, it's an automatic rubber stamp where like the case comes in front of the bishop or not straight away. Okay? One is below the age of 14 for a woman and below the age of 16 for a male. They have to be above these ages.
Just to clarify, the bishop doesn't annul people.
Correct.
He meant that hypothetically.
Yeah.
You have to go to the place, I think, if you want to get the...
Yeah, and he'll send you to the council.
So you have to get approval from him. So you have to go to the process.
The only reason I'm saying that is because some Maronite thinks, oh, if you, like I've heard this a few times, if you pay the bishop enough, he'll annul. The bishop does not annul. It has nothing to do with our bishop at all.
Yeah.
But it was second donation.
But
But it won't be married.
So that's one. Second one is impotence. For those who know impotence, it's not to be confused with sterility. So you can still perform the conjugal act, which is consummation, if you're sterile, but if you're impotent, you can't.
So to make it clear, if a guy can't get it up,
And it happens to girls as well.
girls can't be impotent.
Yes, they can.
How?
Because girls can, there are conditions where girls cannot be infertile. No, but I know that there are conditions where a girl cannot reach climax and they cannot feel anything. But I think that that's not
Has to happen.
The act can still happen.
Whether
Yes. Is that right?
Yes, because she can still have a child.
The reason why I'm saying that is because I read somewhere, and I might be wrong.
is this some random feministic Catholic theory?
No, it's not. I read somewhere that because when a woman is unable to do that in some cases, it affects the man. So like because of that, that can be, it's very, it's not a very straightforward situation, but it can impact, that's what.
You're right.
But maybe I think
I had married this was addressed, I'll just address it if that's all right with you. Essentially the priest said it's like a private thing for the man to be encumbered by the fact that he can't make his wife. We're all mature. He can't make his wife reach that point. And the priest was saying that that's not a good enough reason because in a lot of the cases the man has and the wife was more than happy to engage in the act because she genuinely loved her husband. Like you engage in the act not just because you reach climax, you love the person, you're giving of yourself, you love that person. So it shouldn't be an issue that should not be a problem. Like usually generally is never an issue in terms of
in regards to
So the conditions, so remember, what is an annulment? It's to say that the conditions of marriage were never present to begin with, Angela. Sorry. The annulment, as far as the church is concerned, okay, it doesn't really care much what happens in people's bedrooms, but as far as marriage is concerned, annulment is there to see if the conditions of marriage were there to begin with. And as far as it goes in terms of ability, Okay? If you are sterile, you're still able to consummate your marriage, it's fine.
Sterile is infertile.
Infertile. But if you're impotent, which means you cannot get aroused enough to do the act, then your marriage is invalid. Because what do we say? Christ gave his body for the church. So when you give your body to your wife, it seals the words that you said on the altar. If you cannot perform the act to seal the words that you said on the altar, your marriage is invalid. That's what the Catholic Church says. If you do not consummate your wedding within 1 year of marriage, you are invalidly married. Essentially, you're being fornicating with a woman free, or vice versa. So consummation is important for the condition of marriage to be met. All right? Keep that in mind. How, with respect to what Angela said, how much of a pleasurable experience it is, it does not matter. Okay? It does not matter for the guy or the girl.
Someone just raised a valid point.
For the condition of marriage to be successful.
What doesn't?
Sorry if I'm not meaning to get angry. If that's the case, please.
Climax doesn't matter, but it doesn't make the marriage any less or more happy.
Correct.
Okay, I can provide more context. So just to say, basically, a woman reaching climax is not necessary for procreation, okay? Which is why, for example, like the male reaching climax is different because that is necessary for procreation. So because it's not a sin, it's not required for the marriage to be valid either. It's not like, regardless of that, the marriage is still valid because she can still hold the child in her womb, and they can still be intimate and close in other ways. And yeah.
I understand that as your question exactly. You're saying with female impotence is impacting the man's ability to complete that. Not only to complete that, but the ability.
How would a woman's impotence stop a man from completing that?
I'm sorry, no, the thing is, like, if maybe, this is what I'm trying, I know this is, I'm so sorry. It's something that I've thought about, right? And I've researched out as well. Okay, so like, here's the thing. Like, I understand that, like, I understand what you're saying, but to, like, we're just saying it can be quite possibly, but at the same time, it is very, like, it would be very hard, it can be hard on some men to impact them psychologically if the woman is unable to, and it can impact, like, his
That is an issue, Anne, but how does that affect the legitimacy of the
institution of a marriage? That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
All that marriage, sorry, just for the sake of time, sorry guys. All that marriage, I don't mean to keep hanging off that, and I appreciate you have the courage and respect to keep speaking openly.
I know that there are people that do experience that, and that, like, it is something that can be a problem.
We need to talk more because there's a lot of questions. I want to ask you to challenge a bit better, but also we need to understand that the conditions of marriage to be met are what we said. Whether or not everything else that was just mentioned, that's all that needs to happen. You need to consummate your wedding.
Guys, before you trickle out, me and JC will keep going, but before you trickle out, next week is the final catechism talk for the year, I think, mostly probably. The topic is one of my favorites, because we always like to go off with a bang, but the topic is basically holy sex. We'll be discussing, the importance of sex in marriage, what you can and can't do, IVF, contraception, stuff like that. My favorite topic, but it would be good to see you all here. And we will be discussing more questions like this, which is why we're going to move from it. Yeah.
Okay, so the rest of the conditions for impediment, Mark, just quickly, sorry, before you go, sorry. So these are the ones that they're quick comments. Right? I don't even say that in a encouraging manner. Okay, so if you're already married, alright, straight away, annul. Assume you went to someone else to get married again. One party is Catholic and the other hasn't been baptized. Straight annulment because you didn't go to the bishop to get your dispensation because you're living in an invalid marriage. Okay, the church would rather not. The church will say you never satisfy the conditions of your marriage. You're not technically married. Okay. Next one is the man was ordained to holy orders, so he's currently a priest. This priest can't.
Question.
Yes.
If he's still in seminary,
he's not a priest.
Or what if he becomes
ordained? No, you cannot become a priest.
subject.
Still. If subject leaves the priesthood, it's not. There's no sacrament of holy orders. Yes, an ordained member. That's what a priest is. Yeah. So if the man is ordained to holy orders, the sacrament of holy orders is when you are ordained to become a priest, okay, or a deacon. But it is fuller expression when you're a priest or a bishop. If you marry someone who's ordained a priest, straight annulment because it doesn't satisfy. Okay? Next one is, if either one of the parties have made a public vow of chastity in a religious institute. So if I married a nun, okay, or even if she left the nunhood and she was still a nun, my marriage is invalid. So if a nun's been a nun for like 4 years and she leaves the nunhood, she doesn't be a nun anymore, and I come to marry her, it's invalid. Because at that point, she would have taken her perpetual vows of chastity. Right? A vow is a lifelong commitment. If you vow your chastity to Christ, then you vow to Christ. Right? Instant annulment if you found out like that. Next one is the implement of a crime, killing your spouse or the spouse of another with the intention to marry that partner. Okay, that's instant annulment if you end up getting married to the woman or to the other person. Incest, the church calls it consanguinity. If you marry someone within your family, straight annulment. It's not a valid marriage. Okay? And so so they pick rubber stamp annulments. Everything else, as we explored before, has to go through a process where you raise to your bishop. There's evidence, there's an interview process, it's really grueling, it takes its time, and then the bishop then takes it to the Vatican to be judged. If it's a simple case, or not simple, if it's a case that's seen quickly, they give the nullity there. If the case is escalated, it's like a really tricky case, they take it to what's called a rota panel. Rota just means like they turn around, where you get a judge who's a kind of lawyer essentially, or a cardinal, who's been appointed by the Pope. They see the case, they judge it, and they analyze it based on the evidence. He gets up, another judge, he leaves. Another judge comes in, he analyzes the case. He gets up and he leaves. Another comes, 3 people come and analyze the case. Then they come back on the same panel and they give their verdicts then and there. Okay, and essentially it's a non-biased process. And what that panel deems, will deem if it's a declaration of nullity or not. Okay, that's the process at the highest level. A rota judge.
Is it similar to divorce where only one party is one of the annul and it can probably doesn't need both?
Correct, because
you mentioned earlier and the witnesses which are will be interviewed or asked questions, etc. I wonder if they're not willing because one party's with the wife.
Yeah, so that's what we call they're not cooperating, so it lengthens the process. But because the annulment is given on the merits of the case, it doesn't matter if they're cooperative or not.
It follows the process, but it doesn't nullify it.
It drags the process on because the church only go off what it knows and what's been been argued. It then can make a decision on that. So if I'm divorced, if I'm annulling my wife, okay, and she does not want to buy of it, she's gone, she's blocked me, everything, she's not responding to anyone, the church can still read the merits of the case and annul the marriage. Okay, and does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
You need to provide proof.
Yes.
Like in the instance of the wife not being baptized. But how are you supposed to prove it?
There's no record of her being baptized in the church? So when you get married, they'll say, for example, John Claude Tia is part of the Diocese of St. Charbel's, Chloe Osravi, Diocese of St. John's, whatever it is. And that way, they know that there's a record of baptism in those churches. That's why when you get married, one of the conditions you must provide your baptism certificate to prove that you are baptized, so you can merit a sacramental baptism. Right? So otherwise, you can't satisfy the conditions in the beginning. That's what the church asks you for a baptism certificate. You can't produce it or you forged it, it's invalid.
Is that the full list? At the end of the list?
That's pretty much the end of the list. But if you guys, do you mind if I show you something that is very interesting as well? Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I've heard of situations where Catholics will come to me and say, "But I got a divorce from the church." I'm like, "You got an annulment from the church?" I go, "No. the Catholic Church allowed me to get a divorce. Okay? Now I thought it meant, and this is most of the time what it does mean, when after you've been given an annulment, you then go and get divorced civilly. Because obviously you were married together. Okay? When you get married to the church, the paper you get, you still got to tell the government that you're married and get a new paper. It's the separation of state and church. Okay? But when you get the declaration of nullity, you're going to leave your partner, and essentially all parties are separated, and you obviously need to separate legally. And that's fine, because you got one first and the other follows. However, this might surprise a few of you. Okay? Pauline privilege, we'll get back to that. Remember I said in the scenario with you, Nancy, where there's an unbaptized person, and so two unbaptized people, one of them comes to the faith, and they want to now leave their partner because they're not living in peace. They want to come back to the church, but they're still married. If you find a Catholic partner, you can leave your old partner to join a baptized Catholic partner. Essentially, the old marriage, so the new marriage dissolves the old marriage. It's called the Pauline privilege. Okay, so it obviously comes from Corinthians. You can look this up if you want. Someone asked me to bring this up tonight. And that's why the church allows, I'm not reading it too much, because when you get married, the unbelieving husband has been sanctified through his wife, and the unbelieving wife has been sanctified through her husband. So because marriage is a sacrament has been elevated, Christ's grace is working in that marriage, the church allows someone to enter into marriage with a baptized person, so that they can arrive at the church eventually. If the unbeliever leaves, let it be so. If your partner, if you're not baptized, okay, and you want to become part of the church, but your partner's not cooperative, these Catholics can't believe you baptized. Join please, let's just say his wife became Catholic, and he becomes a dick to his wife, and does not let her do anything. The church would allow his wife to invoke the Pauline privilege.
If she wants to marry Catholic.
If she wants to marry Catholic and the husband's being very difficult and not allowing her, she can then leave, she'll meet Nathan, let's say for example, and then the church would say, okay, Nathan and Jordan Peterson's wife, Tammy, okay, she is not being able to live her faith and have a sanctified marriage. Her husband, at the moment, Jordan Peterson wants to leave, let him leave, and let her join to Nathan and join up in the sacramental union later on. It's called the Pauline privilege.
Is that during a separation?
You have to be separated first to qualify for this, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay, this is what I want to talk to you about. This will blow your mind about divorce. I only found this out researching this talk. It's on the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 336. I'll read it because it's important. It can happen that one of the spouses is the innocent victim of a divorce decreed by civil law, not the church law, civil law. This past, therefore, has not contravened the moral law. There is, which means church law, there is a considerable difference between a spouse who has sincerely tried to be faithful to the sacrament of marriage and is unjustly abandoned, and one who through his own great fault destroys a canonically valid marriage. This is big. Okay? So essentially, if you're a victim of divorce, the sin is not on you. You are not guilty of, let me finish this. You are not guilty of that sin. The church will tolerate the divorce, and in some instances actually go and ask you to get one. If civil divorce remains, like I said, the only possible way of ensuring certain, that's the next one, sorry. So this is saying, let's say you're in an abusive marriage, okay? And your partner, I'll say the husband, because statistics shows mainly the man, even though these days it's a lot the opposite. Your partner's being very abusive to you, and you're trying the best you can, you're praying, you're offering sacrifice, you're tolerating it, you're trying to be a very devout wife, etc., etc. And he says, stuff you, I'm leaving you. And he goes and finds another woman, and he marries her. Alright, and you're trying your best to say, what are you doing? You're not even going to communion. You should be going to, but you're trying your best to offer and pray. He then goes off and essentially gets married and leaves you. He gets a divorce and he leaves you through the government. Because it happens. He runs off and he wants to marry another woman, and then all of a sudden you get in the mail, you want a divorce. You are not guilty of that sin in that case. The church will tolerate that divorce, okay, because it did not happen through your own fault. You can't be guilty of something you didn't cooperate in. So it tolerates the divorce because she shouldn't have to suffer if she was trying to be faithful to her sacrament. The church in an instance would say, well, you're not living in peace, your husband's living in sin, he's abandoned you, you deserve to live in peace, go and file for a divorce, okay? And the church will allow it in that sense. However, they are still considered sacramentally married. So what does the church then ask her to do? Okay? It asks you to get, what do you say? The church would ask you then to actually go and get annulled. Like what Joyce said, you don't have to have both parties cooperating, because what does that mean? You are then free from the spiritual bond of your vows. Sorry? This is at the civil level, the government. But the church will then tell you, now that you've done this and you're living alone, okay, go and get an annulment.
But you may not get it.
You probably will get it, but you may not get it, but exactly right, we'll go through that quickly. But understand this, that you're still technically annulled, but why annulment will be a good thing to do after this divorce happens, because you're freed from the requirements of marriage, or from the bond of marriage. You're still technically one, correct? So in that case, the church will say you are free from that bond, and if your husband's living in adultery because he's cheating on you, is having sexual relations with a woman that's not his own, he's also fornicating because he's having sex outside of a proper marriage that he's with a new woman. So the church would say, as a charity, free him from one mortal sin. At least it's not fornication and adultery, it remains just fornication. Does that make sense? That's what this is trying to say. It's a charity to the woman or to the guy, whoever it is, that if the divorce happens, they are not the victim of it. But the church does not give divorces. It just tolerates the civil one. Does that make sense?
So the she can take the time.
Oh, okay, so what you say?
She can't remarry.
If she gets an annulment, she can. But until then, no.
But her marriage would be valid later?
So they're still married in the eyes of the church until he gets that annulment.
And again, she gets married again, assuming the two conditions are satisfied to it.
Correct. This is confusing a little bit because this was the main reason the Pope had a synod on marriage in itself. Like a couple of years ago, there was a synod called just on this. The Pope wanted to be able to bring those who have lost the church back into the fold. Okay? He did this for this reason. So this is a big debate, even on the cardinals level. I don't expect us to all perfectly understand it either. Cardinals are debating and arguing, what are we going to do? Alrighty.
Is she consenting when she's married to divorce?
Say again?
Is she consenting when she's married to divorce?
So, correct, but that's what I'm saying, the church will tolerate it, not endorse it. You understand when you tolerate something, what it means? You allow the evil to happen at the cost of a better business.
Yes, she can't get married again, and she is married won't be valid as a marriage.
Correct, so she should go for an annulment. Alrighty? Second part of that? This adds to the previous paragraph. If civil divorce remains, the only way possible for ensuring certain legal rights, the care of the children, or the protection of an inheritance, it can be tolerated as does not constitute a moral offense. So essentially you're not guilty of this. Right? I'll just finish on this, guys. Thank you so much. You can look this up. We often obviously say that even in our community, even in my own family, even in the Catholic Church, we're not perfect. Annulments and divorces do happen, sadly. And it's a reflection of our preparedness for what we're entering into, and probably formation of the faith, or a lack of reflection of yourself in what you're entering into. For all sorts of reasons, love or marriage break down. And it's not right. We should prepare ourselves before we enter into the sacraments. However, this place in Croatia, Bosnia, sorry, you can look this up. Okay? Croatia or Bosnia? I think it's Croatian, but Croatia, Bosnia. They share their borders. It's called Sikori Brije. Okay? This place, I actually don't want to get this wrong, so I'll read it off my notes.
Is it a Catholic country?
So, this town is 100% Catholic. It's a population of 26,000. Look how beautiful it is. It's got the river, got some buildings and a beautiful church, houses on the mountains. It looks like a beautiful Lebanon village, okay? 100% Catholic, population 26,000. It has 0 annulments in its history and 0 divorces in all of its history. It is the only place in the world to ever be divorce free. And that is a big statement today when 60% of marriages end in divorce. Now, why is this the case? That kind of buzz. Yes. What separation I share borders? How about the share thing? I'll take it one step. So what happens is on their wedding, this is what happens at every one of their weddings. Just like we have the crowning, okay, that's something special to the Maronites. They have something special that they do. On their wedding day, the couple bring a cross that they choose, okay, and they hand over the cross to the priest where they put it on an altar or a table. The priest puts the bride's hand over the cross, the husband's hand over the bride's hand, and then the priest's soul over both of their hands. And he makes this prayer. You have found your cross. It is a cross you must bear and carry every day of your life. Know how to appreciate it, because your cross will get you to heaven. And then they take this cross with them, so they kiss it, and they take this cross with them into their home. That speaks to the level of preparedness of their marriage. They know what they're entering into. And when we enter marriage with that in mind, when we enter marriage with this in mind, you can expect the same blessings to flow through your marriage. Marriage needs to be for the sanctification of your partner. It's your ticket to heaven. Because just like Christ died on the cross to bring people to heaven, same thing that, I don't keep on here, but same thing that your marriage is meant to do as well.
How should we bring that tradition into the Maronite?
Like you say that much, people won't even be ready to even know to. Like you imagine you mandated that?
Mandated, but let's say you decided to add that.
Would you be able to add it?
In normal life, everyone is married.
If you're a couple that want to do it in your wedding, yeah, go for it. Now that you know the significance, go for it. I think there's no way of even calling just looking at in America, population is 300 million, yeah? 60 million, so 6% of their population is 60 million. Yeah. 60 million Catholics in America, okay? It counts for 6% of their population. Did you know that, and there's 1 billion Catholics in the world, okay? America, even though they account for 6% of the Catholic population in the world, they account for 94% of all annulments. Who's that? America. I'll say it again. 6%. Say it again. 6% of the world's Catholics account for 94% of all annulments. Okay? Now, we're not here to judge, obviously, Americans, but it begs the question, all what we've been saying today. Do we understand what we're entering into? Australia's not far from all that either. I don't know the exact figures because they're not published the same way, but understand that more and more couples are falling through the cracks. Please, you only, it's not my job to say this at the moment, but please, owe it to yourselves to improve your faith, improve your understanding of the sacrament. Understand date with purpose. If it's a calling, it's a sacrifice essentially. And if you're not going to date someone who has their faith values as a priority, then my question to you is, what's going to happen later? Okay, they might not be the best person, but if they're a good Catholic, they're a good Christian and they're working on themselves, so should you. Alrighty, so I've pretty much come to the end of my talk. Thank you so much for your time. The last slide I just had things that are attached to the things that are threats to marriage now: homosexuality, polygamy, divorce, etc. So now that you understand, the message you don't forget: do not separate the unity from the procreating, and you can't go wrong with marriage. If you don't know how to exercise that with your partner you're dating now, question yourself: is it worth dating that person?
Next week, holy sex.
So I'll be around if you want to ask any scenario questions as well.
Except for